Hello, this is brwainer. I'm the compositor and digital effects animator for Wolf the movie. And today I'm going to talk to you about compositing for Wolf. So first off, compositing is taking all the pieces of a movie and putting them together. And in the old days with film, compositing meant that you would take multiple pieces of film and make a composite, a single whole out of them. Nowadays with digital, we're doing mostly the same thing, but it's a lot simpler. Compositing for big movies usually means that you're taking in effects that's, someone has done effects like, say, fire coming out of Iron Man's rockets, whatever. And you're compositing that or adding that together with the original footage that was shot on stage. Maybe you're adding other CG computer-generated elements to a movie. For Wolf, it's a lot simpler, and this is mostly true for every animated thing. Everything's flat, and you're pretty much just stacking things on top of each other. Compositing and editing for animation is largely one and the same, whereas with a movie, you'll have separate editors and compositors, because for live action, because there's just a lot more going on, there's a lot more to do. So when I go to make a composite for Wolf, the first thing is I get all my materials. So I have a folder I call frames, even though there's not everything in here is frames, but this is just my source material. I'm downloading this from our central repository where we actually track all these things. So this is kind of just like my local copy. And so I organize things by scene, so let's look at scene 7, and then you'll see I have everything by shots. We'll look at shot 12, and now we have different types of media that compose shot 12. I'll get into these a little bit later. In one of these, you'll see there's a whole bunch of frames. So these are individual files that are frames. So you see that this is frame 0, frame 8, frame 10, frame 12, frame 14. Once I've downloaded all that, and a couple other things too, I bring them into After Effects. And over here in After Effects, this is where all your source material for After Effects sits. And so you'll see I have the scenes, but instead of shots in After Effects, I organize it by what the type of media is. So anim is our rough animation, and that is the original drawings that someone made. The next thing is audio. So this is spoken dialogue, special effects, probably the soundtrack for this scene when it's done will go in here. Backgrounds, all the backgrounds. And you can see a little bit of a preview up here, even though it's a little small, especially if you're on mobile. I'm sorry, I know you can't see this little window up here, but After Effects just gives you a preview of what something is when you click on it. And then the next thing is color. So this is the colored in frames. I'll usually also have a folder that's called ink, which is kind of the intermediate step between rough animation and color. And then we have layouts. Layouts are like the rough background. You do the layout first before you do the background or the rough animation or anything else. And the layouts also contain information about any camera movements that need to happen. They're a little bit more in-depth than storyboards, and they're just the basis. So in the stage of scene 7, there isn't so many layouts that are still in use. But in other scenes, we might not have the backgrounds yet, so I basically use the layouts as a background. And then pre-comps, in After Effects, a timeline is called a composition, because that's where you're going to composite all your stuff together. And so a pre-comp is when you make a composition whose sole purpose is to then sit in another composition. So for me, shots are pre-comps. That's everything that I have in this structure, and you see I have one for scene 8, scene 9, and this scene X is kind of my template, so it's just got the blank stuff here, so there's like a blank comp, and so I'll use this to like jumpstart my organization here. Then we have some other things, like I always put I have our logo in all my projects just in case I need to grab it real quick. Once I have all the files in After Effects, I start putting them in a timeline. If you look at one of these pre-comps for a shot, here's layers. This one's a little bit complicated because Luna has an aura, and that aura is something that's done on the computer. And I'll get into that more in a separate video about how I do effects. So here's an example of a source is just Janice. Well, actually, technically, this is Janice and Luna, but later on... nope, I lied. It's Janice and Luna the whole time. But the important thing for this scene is that we have Janice. So the background's behind them, and you can see the background separately. And then on top of that, we start building up. All these are components of Luna's aura. So there's a green layer, a different green layer. This one's kind of more teal. A blue layer, a fractal layer, as you can see. I've named these things. A white layer, although this one's very light. It technically does do something when you turn it on. It's just very light. Another white layer. And then this one is the flame component of the aura. And then Luna is composited back on top. This really is compositing right here, where you have an alpha matte and you have different transfer modes. So this one's in add mode, this one's in luminosity mode. And let's go ahead and go back to that fractal state. If I change this from luminosity to, say, darken, well, now it's doing something different. If I change it to lighten, doing something different. Let's try overlay. Yeah, that doesn't look bad. But I've played with this a lot, and when I originally designed the effect for Luna's aura, luminosity is what I chose. So that's what I'm going to leave it at. Why change something that's working properly? So that's compositing. I've put all the things on top of each other that need to be on top of each other. At this stage, I'll also add the name of the item, and actually this is just generated by an expression. So After Effects expressions are based on JavaScript with some extended stuff. The text is literally the name of the composition. So I can paste this into any composition, and it'll just put the name right there. And that's the power of After Effects, really, actually, is the ability to make expressions. As I said, compositing for animation is also being the editor. After I have all the shots together, well, shots go shot 1, shot 2, shot 3 in order. So 1, 2, 3, and now you have a scene because you put them in order. So the videos basically go back to back to back, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But you have to have the audio too. The audio, we probably will, in the end, not have the audio be done in After Effects. After Effects just isn't an audio program. It only has enough audio stuff built in to get you by. At this stage, it's really, all I'm doing is I'm making sure that the levels are enough, high enough, and that all the audio is kind of as equally loud as each other. And then I'll let someone else, or possibly me in the future, figure out the actual, do we need to try to do some noise reduction? Do we need to add any effect to the audio? How do we adjust the volume of the audio, etc.? I'll leave that to the future, and possibly to someone else. Just because After Effects isn't designed for it. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you get into compositing. But while I do that, I'll just let this shot go. It's really one of my favorite shots that I've worked on so far. So if you are interested in being a compositor, the barrier to entry really is the software. Let's say you want to make the classic lightsaber effect on a video that you and your buddy just were playing around with. There's basically 3 programs you can use to do that. There's After Effects, which is quite costly. I won't get into the cost, but you can look it up yourself. And then the next step down is Sony Vegas, which is primarily an editing program, but I hear it has good compositing and effects tools. I've never used it. I can't vouch for it, but I hear good things about it. I hear that a lot of people use Sony Vegas for lots of things. And then the third one is Apple Motion, which is kind of the counterpart to Final Cut Pro. I believe that when Final Cut Pro X was released, they made Motion $50 on the OS X App Store. But don't take my word for that. I'm not an Apple person. I used Motion in college, and it works. I didn't particularly like the interface. It's certainly not as powerful as After Effects, but for a lot of things, it gets the job done. So that's your three to look at: After Effects, Sony Vegas, and Apple Motion. And then computer-wise, there's a couple of key specifications for your computer that you should be concerned about. First off is your processor. All the compositing software is primarily processor bound. I believe Sony Vegas does have a good deal of hardware acceleration built in. After Effects is getting more and more graphics hardware acceleration that's based on the graphics card, but everything else is based on your CPU. So you need a good processor. And so I have a i5 4690K, which is basically Intel's second best processor from about mid-2015. At least I believe that's when it came out. It's about a year old, maybe 2 years old. It's not the best, so you're not paying for the bleeding edge, but it is pretty good. Now, there are more powerful processors, technically, but for normal consumer processors, what you really want to look at is a Core i5 something. You can get by with a much slower processor. It'll just take longer to do most things. The next thing you want to look at is RAM. I have 16 gigabytes of RAM. After Effects loves RAM, loves to eat up memory. If I try to play Scene 7 the way that I was just playing Shot 12, it'll only be able to show me about 50 seconds at a time, just because it does the playback, it builds up the playback in memory. Now, editing programs like Premiere and Final Cut Pro, they don't do so much in memory. They mostly do things by rendering to the disk, or they just do things on the fly. After Effects, if you want smooth playback, especially if you want your audio to play back in sync with your video, it's going to have to do a RAM preview, which means it's storing all the frames in your RAM, which takes a lot. I have 16 gigabytes, but I really wish I had 32 gigabytes. You can get by with 4 or 8 gigabytes, especially if you're doing only 720p or 1080p. We are actually doing all this in 3K, which is about halfway between 1080p and 4K. So that's why I only get about 50 seconds of playback in a scene at a time, without having to actually render a file to view outside of After Effects. The third thing is your graphics card. If you want to use the ray tracer in After Effects, you basically need something that supports CUDA. CUDA only is supported by NVIDIA. So if you are interested in ray tracing in After Effects, which frankly I've never used, I don't think it's an important feature, but if you are interested in ray tracing on After Effects, you're going to need an NVIDIA processor, and you're going to need a pretty decent one, like at least a $200 graphics card, I'd say. I have a GTX 970. I used to have a 750 Ti, which was perfectly fine. I upgraded to the 970 just for gaming purposes. If you're going to use Adobe software, you really need an NVIDIA graphics card for some of the hardware acceleration. There is other things, there's other effects in After Effects that are OpenGL based. So those will work on AMD. But overall, I'd say NVIDIA is what you need. That's kind of your barrier to entry. A decent-ish computer and the right software. If you want to use Apple Motion, obviously you're going to need a computer running OS X. Obviously, there's more to compositing than just having the right software. You need a bit of creativity. You need something to composite. So that's compositing, and I gave you a little sneak peek of Scene 7, which we're not ready to release. I'm not sure if we will release Scene 7 on YouTube before the movie is done. If you're interested in helping out, or if you know someone else who's interested in helping out, please visit our website, wolfmovie.com, and either come talk to us on the forum or send us an email. We'll see what your talents are and how we can use you. We currently are looking for background artists and inkers. but also rough animators. Really, if you have any artistic skill at all, come talk to us. We'd appreciate the help, and it'll help get this movie done faster. All right, that was compositing, so I hope you have a good one. Bye.